It is perhaps a measure of the utter and total nature of the defeat inflicted upon Germany that there was to be no resistance to the occupying Allied armies. As the territory of the Reich was fought over and destroyed, Hitler had ordered the construction of what he called the National Redoubt. This was to be a fortified region based in the mountains of southern Bavaria, the home of Nazism. The National Redoubt was to be manned and defended by the werewolves, fanatical Nazi terrorists who would act as an underground resistance. Hitler's deputy, Martin Bormann, said, "The werewolf has been born of National Socialism. It makes no allowances and knows no consideration as imposed on regular troops. Hatred shall be our prayer, revenge our battle cry." The werewolves of 1945 became as unreal as any fairy tale monster. In World War II, cities were to prove powerful fortifications, better perhaps than the complex, specially built structures such as the Maginot Line. The maze of streets lined with solidly constructed public buildings, themselves labyrinths of corridors and passages, were ready-made for defenders. The sewers, the tunnels, and the cellars became ready-made bunkers. The more demolished by artillery and air bombardment, the more easily defended the cities became. As Russian armies pressed ever closer to Berlin, Hitler retreated to his bunker deep beneath the city. All through the spring of 1945, the Russians amassed troops for the final battle. On April 10th, this massive force was unleashed. In spite of the desperate position of the Third Reich, there was no lack of Germans prepared to fight to the very last in the defense of Berlin. By April 26th, 460,000 Russians with 1,500 tanks, 13,000 guns, and 26,000 rocket launchers surrounded the inner city center. The city's civilians cowered in the cellars under shell fire, without food or water. Behind the advancing Russians of the front line came a second wave of Soviet troops, some of them freed prisoners of war, bent on revenge with the mass murder, rape, and looting of civilians. Many of those Nazis who fought in this last battle were, by the chance of war, Belgian, Dutch, or French, who had volunteered to fight communism. With the Russians meters away, Hitler committed suicide. An hour before Hitler's death, Soviet soldiers had taken the Reich's chancellery. Hitler had appointed Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor, as leader of the German people. Some of those who remained in power after Hitler's death believed in a fantasy that a truce preparatory to peace talks could still be arranged. The only answer the Russians gave was a demand for unconditional surrender and even heavier shelling. On May 2nd, the German forces defending Berlin requested a ceasefire, and at 3 p.m., the Russian guns fell silent. The last great battle of the European war had been fought, with a terrible toll of death. In the 3 weeks of fighting for Berlin, the Red Army had lost 10% of its strength, the heaviest losses of the war, apart from the great collapses of the early years of Barbarossa. The last days of the Reich were dominated by attempts to avoid the wrath of the Russians. Dönitz attempted to buy time for Eastern armies to make fighting withdrawals. The forces in the West were surrendered piecemeal. On May 4th, the Netherlands, Denmark, and northwestern Germany surrendered to British General Montgomery. On May 5th, the Germans offered to surrender to all American forces, again hoping to buy time. Eisenhower told the Germans unconditional surrender were the only terms on offer. It was agreed all German forces would cease operations on May 8th. The surrender was signed at Reims in France, at Eisenhower's headquarters. Stalin suspected treachery and demanded a separate surrender be signed in Berlin. May 8th was designated Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. In Europe, vast tides of humanity, waves of misery, swept through ruined streets and cities, desperately seeking for food, shelter, and safety amongst the wreckage of civilization. In every city, town, and village of Britain and America, ecstatic crowds filled the streets to celebrate the victory. Next time, on World War II, The Complete History, the world awakens from the party of VE Day to realize that a war remains to be fought. The final act of the tragedy of the war is played out in the Pacific Ocean. Fate has catapulted Harry S. Truman to the center of events. The largely unknown U.S. politician projected into the presidency by the death of Franklin Roosevelt now finds that he must make a decision which will end the war at a stroke. His grim choice is whether or not to deploy the atomic bomb against the cities of Japan. The forces of Soviet communism continue fighting some days after VE Day, ensuring the map of Europe is a reflection of Stalin's paranoia and suspicions. At the Potsdam Conference, Germany is divided and dismembered, divisions that will last for nearly 2 generations. At Potsdam, a new face represents Britain, as Winston Churchill loses the post-war election. In the ruins of Europe, a swirling mass of humanity struggles to rebuild a continent, and the United States Marshall Plan is devised to create a stable future. India becomes free of the British Empire. In the French colony of Vietnam, a struggle begins for liberation. The Iron Curtain falls as the Soviet Empire is created with all of Eastern Europe falling under the domination of the Soviet Union.